Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and it's time once again for your weekly wrap-up, and this week we're going to talk about social engineering as it relates to the Twitter hack that happened last week. It is the oldest trick in the book and still the most effective when people are trying to gain access to a system, and it looks like Twitter has a serious problem on their hands, and it's going to be something that impacts all of us as well, no matter how careful we are. We're going to explore this topic in depth right now, so let's get to it. Now, as I mentioned, social engineering really is the oldest trick in the book, and it typically involves the attacker convincing the target that they can be trusted. And when that trust is gained, the recipient often just hands over personal login information, other types of personal information, and the attacker can use that to gain access to a system. And more often than not, the entry point into some of these major hacks that we keep reading about isn't with some coding prowess, but rather just simple persuasion, because humans are always the weakest link of security. After they get in, of course, perhaps that's where the coding prowess comes into play for extracting data, but typically social engineering is just tricking another human into giving somebody else access. Now, the Twitter attack that happened this week involved a bunch of verified accounts all tweeting out the same Bitcoin scam at around the same time. This included Jeff Bezos, Barack Obama, Apple, a bunch of other folks got hit with this. You probably saw those tweets going out. And when I saw this, I said, boy, we've really got a problem here, because I can't imagine that all of these companies were not using some kind of two-factor authentication to prevent this kind of thing from happening. There clearly was something happening inside of Twitter that allowed access to these accounts, and that is exactly what happened. Vice News was one of the first out of the gate to say that hackers convinced a Twitter employee to help them hijack accounts. And Vice got that information from the hackers themselves, but also with some proof that the hackers sent along, which is this screenshot here that showed some of the back-end tools that Twitter uses to manage accounts. And there was a few other screenshots like this one where the hackers proved that they had inside access to the Twitter system, which means that any of the two-factor authentication that these accounts were using was essentially null and void, because they were getting in through the back door and not trying to come in with those account credentials directly. And that was the biggest concern with this particular attack. Now, a lot of folks were speculating that this was some kind of inside job, because there had been prior examples of insiders at Twitter doing things to user accounts. One example was this one from 2017, where an employee deactivated President Trump's account for 11 minutes. Twitter initially said it was an accident, but as it turns out, it was done on purpose by an employee who was on their way out the door. So they left their mark as they were either quitting or being fired. So that was something that didn't look too good on the company. There was another example here where some employees were actually spying on user accounts and handing that information allegedly over to Saudi Arabia. That's certainly an area of concern given some of the issues that have cropped up with dissidents and the Saudi government. Now, with this current attack, Twitter did put out a statement this week to say that it looks as though they had been the target of a social engineering attack, and it was done by people who successfully targeted some of their employees with access to internal systems and tools. They haven't elaborated on exactly what those systems and tools were, but we'll probably hear more about it soon. The New York Times, though, has a story that really kind of lays out exactly what happened after talking to some of the hackers who allegedly pulled this off. And in the article, it mentions that these folks were able to gain access not to Twitter's backend initially, but to their internal Slack messaging channel, which is a totally different service than Twitter. And they were able to get credentials to log into the back end through Slack. And this is one of these examples of a good social engineering attack where you can get into one thing, burrow your way through, and start finding things that you can do in other places. And that's what happened here. So the Twitter back end was secure, but the credentials to get into that back end were out in plain sight on Slack. So it looks as though these folks got a Twitter employee to hand over a username and password to a Slack account. That Slack account had access to the credentials, and that's how this was executed. So what was the impact of this attack? Well, it looks as though about $117,000 worth of Bitcoin was sent to the address being tweeted out by those celebrity tweeters whose accounts had been compromised. So not a huge amount of money here, but this didn't run all that long. But we don't know whether or not this is legitimate money from people being swindled, or perhaps the hackers just moving money in between each other. But this was the figure that was making its way to that Bitcoin address. Twitter says that about 130 accounts were targeted, and they were able to gain access to 45 of those accounts. And the attackers were able, once they got into those accounts, to initiate a password reset, log into the account, and send out the tweets. So what they were able to do from the back end was probably change the email address that that account was associated with. They sent out a password reset. They were able to take over the account again because they had access to those tools. And then they sent the tweets out from those accounts themselves. So they were pretty busy here getting access to those. Now, additionally, 8 of the Twitter accounts had data downloaded completely. So there is a way that you can check out your data. This is a feature of Twitter where you can just download everything that's on your account. This came out as a result of the regulations in Europe that require these companies to offer all the data that they're collecting to the user. So that's valuable for privacy, but it also gives hackers something to take from you because Twitter stores a lot of stuff. And it looks as though 8 accounts that were compromised had this happen to their accounts. What's interesting, though, is that the 8 that had the information downloaded were not verified accounts. Now, Twitter, of course, if you see there on the Twitter support tweet, has a little check mark next to it. So if you're a celebrity, they verify your account so that users on Twitter know that you've been verified as being that person. And it looks as though the 8 accounts that were compromised here were not verified or not celebrity accounts. So it's really intriguing to see that's what they chose to download. So we'll have to see what comes out of this. They're not going to release what accounts were the ones that got downloaded. They did notify the account holders, but as far as those people are concerned, all of the information in their Twitter account is now in the hands of these people who conducted this attack. So what does Twitter collect? Well, they collect a lot of information. Even though it's a very public social media network, they do get your personal info, like your date of birth, your phone number, other things related to who you are. They get your IP addresses. They get your GPS location when you're posting tweets. They get direct messages that might be occurring in private between one or more Twitter users. And I think that is probably, next to the phone number and date of birth information, one of the most critical pieces of information that these people gained access to. Because even if they didn't download the Jeff Bezos account, for example, his DMs were accessible while they were logged into that account for that period of time. They could have run through very quickly and taken screenshots and gotten a lot of information about those 45 accounts and who they're communicating with privately. Twitter also stores browsing history, search history, basically everything every other social media firm collects. And for a while, again, even though those things were not downloaded, those attackers had access to all of that information. And that's why this attack is so concerning, because Twitter is a place where people with tremendous influence gather and communicate. A lot of that's done publicly, but there's a lot done in private DMs. And for 45 very influential accounts, these folks had access to that stuff and were probably rummaging around to see who they were communicating with. So I don't think we've seen the end of this story. This will likely be far more than just a random Bitcoin scheme going on here. So buckle up, folks, and stay tuned. And this speaks to just how dangerous these social engineering attacks can be, because all of the things that you could do right as a user to protect your account, two-factor authentication, a unique password, none of that mattered, because these folks got in through the back door and had high-level access to every single one of Twitter's accounts. And if you didn't get an email, you likely weren't impacted this time. But I wonder, why wasn't Twitter securing this back end the way we users do to protect ourselves? And that's going to be something that Twitter is going to need to communicate to all of us. I wouldn't be surprised to see some pretty major lawsuits follow this incident. And hopefully this was all that was taken, because if it was this easy for this Bitcoin group to do it, who else has been in there rummaging around for this period of time? So let's see what happens here, but I bet you there's more going on. And Twitter is not the only company that's susceptible, of course, to social engineering attacks. A very common one involves something called SIM swapping, where somebody calls up the phone company pretending to be you, and they get the SIM card assigned to your account swapped out to a phone that the attacker has in their possession. And after that, all of the text messages that you're receiving come to that user, and they basically have full control of your mobile phone account. And you can imagine the types of things you can access from there. So this ZDNet reporter got hit not once but twice by this, and he details the whole horrifying incident here in this article. And again, this happened just last year. And if you think about it, every customer service representative at one of these companies is an attack vector. And if they happen to just let their guard down for a second, this kind of stuff can happen, and it happens all the time. You've probably seen a lot of YouTubers get hit with this as well. Very scary stuff. There is a great book about social engineering and how it is executed by Kevin Mitnick, who's one of the legendary early hackers. I remember reading about him on my bulletin board systems as a kid and all the legal woes that he was going through. And this book is about how he did his hacks, essentially. And he wasn't a malicious hacker. He just liked to gain access to things that he wasn't supposed to have access to. And a big part of what he did was social engineering, convincing people on the phone that he was somebody that can be trusted. And here's just an excerpt from the book. And I highly suggest you purchase this book and read it. It is so good. It's still relevant now, even though all this stuff happened in the 80s. This is an affiliate link, by the way, for the book. But he says, look, the basic tactic is simple. You start with a particular goal and you do reconnaissance. You figure out how the company works, what the people at the company will want to hear from you, what kind of requests do they usually get, and you call up and just sound like you are part of that company. And he was actually able to get access to a large component of the phone network at the time. In fact, at one point he was able to even gain physical access to a facility and walk around freely because they thought he worked there. Scary stuff, but it's all through social engineering. Kevin Mitnick, of course, is a good hacker in his own right, just on the coding side, but to get into that part where you could actually use the code, you've got to be convincing, and he was certainly able to do that. Fascinating read. I highly recommend it. So what are some of the things you can do to protect yourself from future attacks like this? Well, unfortunately, there's not much you can do in this instance as it relates to Twitter, because it was on them to keep your data safe, and they failed. They had the keys to their back door essentially out in plain sight on a Slack channel, and somebody got in. And this sort of thing happens a lot, and unfortunately, there's not much you can do to protect your own account. What you could do, though, is maybe move your private conversations to a platform that's more secure. There are a number of instant message applications that practice true end-to-end encryption, meaning that the service that you're on stores encrypted data that they can't access, and only you can with your phone and the right key. That might be a thing to do to protect yourself from Twitter, at least in the future. Leave all your public stuff public there and everything else private on a different service that's more secure. That could be something to pursue. Another thing I would suggest is that if you are in a position through work or some other activity where you have access to a lot of personal and private information of others, that you really up your game in verifying that the people you're speaking to really are who they say they are. That means following your company policies to the letter and never making an exception. That means maybe verifying via phone an email request you might get from somebody, even if you trust the person. Little things like that, good habits, I think will start to flutter out into the workplace in a way that might improve things overall. But it requires everyone to be really stringent about it and really enforce it peer-to-peer in the workplace to make things better. And that's something I think we can all do. Now, individual accounts, of course, are susceptible to these kinds of social engineering attacks as well. What happened with John Podesta in the 2016 election, and also with Colin Powell and even former President George W. Bush, they all fell victim to spear phishing emails. Now, this was not somebody calling you up on the phone, but rather somebody sending over an email that looked like it was from Gmail. They clicked on it, provided their passwords, and boom, you have a scandal on your hands. So you can be putting in place things like two-factor authentication and not using SMS-based two-factor, but using the Google Authenticator app, for example, as a means of protecting your accounts. You can also have unique passwords for every site that you access, because one other vector here is that if somebody were to get your password on one service, they can try it on many others. So getting that secured by maybe getting a password manager will help prevent future attacks as well. So if they get into one, they can't get into another. Training your family and employees, like we just talked about, is really important. If you have access to data, making sure the people that you're responsible for are responsible with that data, that's a good step that you can take. I would also regularly check your app and program access to accounts. So see what apps you've attached to your Gmail account, for example, or to your Facebook account, and make sure that you really still want those apps attached. It may not be something you use anymore. Disconnect it so your account is a little bit more secure. And finally, we just need to demand more from platforms. Twitter's got, again, a lot of explaining to do here, and many other platforms need to give us confidence that what happened to Twitter is not going to happen to our Gmail accounts or other accounts with a lot of personal and private information contained in them. So yeah, we've all got a lot of work to do, and some people have a lot of explaining to do as well. So this week's weekly wrap-up is being brought to you by all of you. We had a bunch of super chatters who contributed during our live streams the other day. Peyton Lutz, John Early, Ken Driggers II, the Brown made 2 super chat contributions over the last week, and Mark Bessert also contributed on our most recent live event. We have a number of supporters who added themselves to our roles as well. Henry Druckerman contributed via the donor box page. ZCHR made a Patreon contribution, and we got 3 new YouTube membership program participants here. Russell Lishard, Peyton Lutz, and S. Beasley. I want to thank everyone who contributed to the channel this week and everyone who's been contributing on an ongoing basis. I also want to thank all of you who watch on a regular basis as well, because all of those things equal channel growth, and I am greatly appreciative of your support. And if you want to support the channel and be shouted out here on the wrap-up, you can go to Lon.TV/support and make a monthly or a one-time contribution. And again, you can also join via the YouTube membership program just by clicking the Join button, which is located right below this video. So this week on the channel, we had 3 live streams. Yesterday, we installed the Terra Onion mode on both the Saturn and the Dreamcast. It went very smoothly. We're going to have a condensed version of that live stream going up later this week. So if 2 hours and 28 minutes is a bit too long, we'll have something in the 20-minute range for you too, so stay tuned. We also did some unboxing of more laptops. We had an HP, a Lenovo, and a Dell. Some good stuff, and we're going to be reviewing those items very shortly. We also tested out the new ATEM Mini Pro in a live stream to see how it differed from the original. On the Extras channel, we had some unboxings that we did during that live stream, again, condensed down into shorter bite-sized pieces here. The XPS 15, which is a beautiful 15-inch laptop, and a new mid-range laptop from HP. And then on the main channel, we reviewed the Lenovo ThinkPad L13 Yoga. And I called this an entry-level device, and I got some heat for that. It's an entry-level ThinkPad. ThinkPads are usually much more expensive than what this one starts at. This is the entry level for ThinkPads, not for laptops in general, just clarifying. We also looked at some multi-gigabit Ethernet adapters from Sabrent. One was good, one was not. You can see what I thought on that video there. And then we had my condensed version of the ATEM Mini Pro, a full review of all the things that it does that the original Mini does not do. And what's nice about this video switcher is that you can basically bring this out to a site and stream live and record, do all your video switching, all the things you could do with the other Mini without the need for a PC at all. Really slick little device and under 600 bucks. And this week on the channel, I've got 2 things already set to go. One is our review of the mode. Little spoiler, I loved it. I'm buying another one. So it's good stuff, and you'll see how it works with both the Dreamcast and the Saturn. I also got in this gaming keyboard from Logitech, the G915 TKL. A really nice mechanical clicky keyboard. I enjoyed playing with it, and you will see a full review of that very shortly. Now, if you like what I do and want to get notified every time we go live or upload a video, you can click on the bell and get that notification delivered to your email or mobile device. We also have another option for watching me, which is a number of other channels that I do. That includes our Extras channel for unboxing and supplementary content. We've got the podcast. We have my Snippets channel, which we haven't uploaded to recently, but it will be updated at some point. We have our live streams at Lon.TV/livestreams, which is a full archive of every live stream that we've done. And then we've got my Amazon shop, where you can follow me on Amazon shopping platform, where we also go live and upload videos. You can engage with the channel with my very infrequent email list. The Facebook group has been getting more and more popular, and what I've been doing is directing people who've been emailing me with individual technical support questions to the Facebook group, because I found collectively we can really help people faster. So if you do have an individual tech support item, you'll likely get a faster response on the Facebook group than you will to my email. I've been getting so many NAS and Plex questions, I just can't keep up individually. So that's a great place to go, and I'll pop in when I can as well to try to help. And then we have my store at Lon.TV/store, where we sell previously used items that we reviewed here on the channel. And I should have some more stuff going up a little later this week if I get time. And you can get notified when those things go live on the store by going to my store alert email at Lon.TV/store alert, and I'll email you every time something gets added to the store. And that is going to do it for this week's weekly wrap-up. I want to thank you all for tuning in and your continued support and comments and suggestions. All of that is very valued, and I greatly appreciate everything you all do to keep this channel operating, because your eyeballs make it all happen. So thank you very much for that. We'll have a bunch more coming up this week, probably a live stream or two as well. So click the bell, and you should see me on your device very shortly. That'll do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Tom Albrecht, Chris Allegretta, David Hockman, Brian Parker, Mike Patterson, and Bill Pomerantz. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/s.